Good evening and welcome to The Story. I'm Evan Watson. We begin tonight with a look at Oregon's priorities. Governor Tina Kotek presented her proposed budget today, and the long legislative session starts next month. So what's the plan? Where are the gaps? And why should you care? That's our big story tonight. A governor's budget proposal is not the flashiest of news items, I will admit, but it carries weight both in Salem and across the state, showing where the current administration is focusing its efforts. Typically, we might highlight some new initiatives to bring big changes that are to come. In this case, Governor Kotek didn't even give us that luxury, repeatedly saying that this proposal is a continuation of the state's current work, a stability budget, in her words, and she's doubling down on her priorities.
There's no surprises here. These are the priorities I've talked about since day one. I'm going to continue to talk about them. We need to stay the course. I think sometimes I worry. They'd be like, oh, we did that. We should move on. It's like, we're not done. Normally you see governors like, here's my list of new stuff. We're not talking new folks. We're talking about staying the course on the stuff that works.
So what are those priority areas? Kotek lists three: homelessness and housing, behavioral health, and education. Her budget proposal for 2025 through 2027 calls for billions of dollars to go to these three areas. Kotek said her budget does not lay people off or cut services. And when it comes to homelessness, she says her budget proposal would keep new shelter sites open and support their staff.
If we continue at this pace, the equivalent of nearly 1 in 3 Oregonians experiencing unsheltered homelessness on my first day in office will be rehoused by the end of my first term.
Oregon has a growing mental health crisis, one that I've been following for years in my Uncommitted series. A state study this year called for an additional 3,700 treatment beds to meet demand in the state. Kotek's budget gets nowhere near that number, but would fund part of that expansion.
We can't close our gaps in services without more places to get treatment and more people to provide that treatment. The state currently has a goal of an additional 465 treatment beds by the end of 2026, and my budget deepens this commitment with investments for another 363 treatment beds.
The budget proposal also includes a $600 million increase to the state's school fund and supports free school meals for every child, a piece of legislation we often heard about during the run-up to this past election from Democratic VP candidate Tim Walz. Kotek has also called lawmakers to Salem this month for a special session to sort out wildfire funding. She wants them to come up with $218 million to cover current costs and debt, as well as divert $150 million more that is currently headed to the state savings account to prepare for and fight future wildfires. And then the big item, there's transportation, expected to be the hallmark of the upcoming long session. ODOT is desperate for money, and her proposed budget, Governor Kotek recommended $1.75 billion, which she describes as the minimum number just to meet basic needs. State officials say this falls way short of everything else.
It is up to the legislature to figure out how to figure that out for the next biennium. The legislature is going to have to grapple with at least getting to that number, and then how they spend it will be the conversation. I don't think we can do anything less than that to have a functioning agency to meet the basic needs as well as do some of the project work that's out there.
That number being the $1.75 billion. For context, the last big transportation package that passed through Salem was in 2017 with a price tag of $5.3 billion. So the big funding package this time around will garner big headlines, but no one has said how they plan to pay for it, Kotek including. New or increased taxes or tolls could be options, but certainly unpopular. A new Democratic supermajority in both chambers means they could push through new funding sources without Republican support, but it's unclear what that looks like or even if they could get all Democrats on board. This afternoon, Republicans criticized Kotek's proposed budget, saying it relies too much on expanded government programs and unchecked spending. Senate Republican leader Daniel Bonham said Governor Kotek's proposal doubles down on the same failed strategies that have left Oregonians struggling. More government spending and bureaucracy won't fix Oregon's housing crisis, homelessness epidemic, healthcare affordability, or student success. It'll make these issues worse. He went on, they say the governor proposes and the legislature disposes. Thankfully, this political statement of a budget will face legislative scrutiny because it ignores the real needs of Oregonians. And House Minority Leader-elect Christine Drazen released a statement late this evening that says in part, "This budget has no new ideas and no new vision. Whether it's schools, addiction, roads, or public safety, under Governor Kotek's leadership, this budget means Oregonians can expect to pay more, but get less." Lawmakers will now sift through Kotek's 476-page budget proposal and make their changes during the long session, which begins on January 21st. We, of course, will be watching. And while we're talking about the legislative session next month, we wanted to answer this question from viewer Joseph. If Democrats gain a supermajority, can Republicans still block votes with walkouts? I remember it came down to having a quorum to pass a vote. Does supermajority equal a quorum, or is that still an effective blockade? The short answer to that question is that yes, it could still be an effective blockage, but there are strings attached. As it stands, Democrats have supermajorities in both chambers, 36 seats in the House, 18 in the Senate. That's 3/5 of each chamber. But in order to have a quorum to do any kind of state business, 2/3 of members must be present, 60 to 66-ish%. In the House, that's 40 seats. In the Senate, it's 20. So if enough Republicans walked out, Democrats do not have a quorum on their own, and the deadlock that we've seen several times in recent years could happen. But now there is, of course, a consequence if lawmakers decide to walk out, and that's Measure 113. That is the law that says legislators are barred from holding office after their current term if they have 10 or more unexcused absences in a single session. Oregon voters overwhelmingly approved 113 back in 2022, but Senate Republicans quickly defied that measure and staged the longest walkout in state history during the 2023 session. Republicans then challenged the law in court, but the Oregon Supreme Court ruled against them. So, if Republicans decide to walk out, they would be up against that 10 unexcused absence threshold. It's worth noting that both GOP leaders in the House and Senate have used the walkout tactic in the past. House Minority Leader Christine Drazen led walkouts when she held that same job a few years ago, and Senate Minority Leader Dan Bonham was part of the 2023 walkout, which will bar him from holding office once his current term is up at the end of 2026. Big news in the tech industry today. The leader of Oregon's largest private employer abruptly retired this morning. Retired in air quotes, more like forced out. Pat Gelsinger is out as CEO of Intel. CNBC reports Intel stock is down more than 50% year to date, and the company just laid off or gave early retirement to 2,600 workers in Oregon. Now the CEO, who was tasked with leading an Intel comeback, is out, as Pat Doris explains.
63-year-old Pat Gelsinger became Intel's CEO back in 2021. It was a triumphant return for the engineer who started at Intel in 1979 and steadily rose through the ranks for 30 years. He left Intel in 2012 and then returned to help right the company that missed the AI revolution in chips and fell behind competitors. Back then, he was undaunted.
As the incoming CEO, I am just really thrilled that we have the opportunity to take this great icon of a company, this company that has been crucial to every aspect of technology, and have it be that leader again into the future. Because I believe that Intel has a treasure trove of technologists, of technology, and ultimately its core DNA is being that technology leader for the future. And I'm just thrilled as a technologist, as a geek at heart, to be able to be in that leadership role to help bring the passions, the history, the opportunity of this great company forward as never before. Our best days are in front of us.
But the years since have been rough. Despite Gelsinger's optimism, the company continued to struggle. The stock price is down more than 50% this year alone, and Intel just cut 15,000 jobs worldwide to save money. Mike Rogaway is a business reporter for The Oregonian and follows Intel closely.
It's not shocking in the sense that everyone knew that things were tough at Intel. It was having a hard time. His turnaround plan hadn't delivered the results people anticipated.
Intel matters for a number of reasons, including that it's Oregon's largest private employer. The company estimates it contributes about $19 billion a year to Oregon's economy. It employs around 20,000 people, even after the layoffs and retirements. Rogaway says Intel's board apparently felt Gelsinger's plan was taking too long.
I mean, fundamentally, his strategy was built for a company with $75 to $100 billion in revenue, and because he'd committed to spend so much, up to $100 billion on new factories. That was going to take longer than he'd anticipated. Intel's revenues were declining, not increasing, even as its costs were increasing. So it just put him in an impossible squeeze. In the fullness of time, given enough time, perhaps that revenue could come back and his strategy could play out. Intel just didn't, the board evidently didn't feel they had that time.
Intel announced 2 senior leaders will lead the company while the board searches for a CEO. David Zinzer and Michelle Johnston Holthouse will serve as interim co-chief executive officers. Raghuway, the reporter, thinks that is an odd setup and that it signals the board may be ready to split Intel into 2 companies.
It certainly seems like they're in the process of separating the business. How quickly that will move and how formal the separation will be, it's hard to say, but it definitely seems like it's going that way.
Pat Torres joins me now. Hey, Pat, can you explain a little bit more on how Intel might be split in this case?
Sure. For years, Intel has worked on designing, developing, and then building in their own factories these incredible chips. But under Gelsinger, they started to really develop this foundry idea. And the thought there is that they have these factories. Why don't they use them to build some competitor chips? So they've been growing that. So a lot of people think that if they are split into 2, it might be the foundries on one side and the design on the other side.
Okay, interesting schism there. And then also Governor Kotek addressed this today, right? What'd you learn from that?
Well, she's a big fan of Intel, and she's also a big fan of the $7.5 billion that Intel just got from the federal government, as well as the $115 million that the state in state money has given Intel. Here's what she said about the news today.
Well, I will say, from my understanding is, as of last week, the federal government did ink the deal for CHIPS and Science Act money from the federal government coming to Intel, which means they will continue forward on their expansion on their campus out in Washington County. So that is good. We are going to continue to be a very strong sector here in semiconductor manufacturing. The money from the state's CHIPS Act is been moved out the door, but it'll continue to be a very important part of our economy. You see investments in my budget to continue that work, to make sure those dollars are going out the door, that the workforce is being stimulated to provide the workforce necessary. I continue to be bullish on advanced manufacturing in the semiconductor industry here in Oregon. We are solid. Intel might have some ups and downs, but they have stayed committed to Oregon, and I think they'll be here for a while.
Okay, so there's that. And by the way, don't believe this nonsense that Gelsinger retired. Bloomberg and a lot of other agencies are reporting that he was forced by the board to choose retirement or be fired. So he said, I retire.
Retirement is the option. Big business news that affects a lot of people in our community and, of course, in our state here. It's great to have that context. Thank you, Pat.
You bet.
Intel has struggled to crack the artificial intelligence market, a technology evolving faster than many of us may realize. It has the potential to revolutionize healthcare, and we'll show you 2 incredible examples being worked on right here in the Pacific Northwest when the story returns. Now to some wild advancements in artificial intelligence when it comes to healthcare. According to a study published in the American Health and Benefits Journal, an estimated 1.2 million hospitalizations each year in the U.S. are due to errors involving injectable medicines. Basically, healthcare workers accidentally giving patients the wrong drugs. But scientists are working on a way to flag those errors before they happen using AI. Christine Pei shows us how.
This video, recorded from a head-worn camera, shows a healthcare provider getting a syringe ready for medicine. In this example, a powerful sedative known as propofol is properly labeled, as you can see in the text flashes. But in this staged example, using different medication, there is a mismatch in the label placed on a syringe. What you're looking at is an AI system attached to the camera that is flagging the error in real time.
So the goal is really for patient safety.
Artificial intelligence is increasingly ingrained in our lives, and it could soon play an important safety component in the ICU or an operating room by preventing medicine errors.
We know that the medication from the vial to the syringe, it's possible that things could get switched up and then the patient could get the wrong drug. And this is important because maybe it could be a drug they're allergic to.
Dr. Kelly Michelson is an associate professor of anesthesiology at UW Medicine. She and her team researched how effectively AI can alert any mismatches in the drugs they're about to give to a patient.
People make mistakes.
Shyam Golagota is a professor at UW's Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering and co-authored the study with Dr. Michelson. He thought about using AI while considering some grim numbers. An estimated 5 to 10% of all drugs given are linked with errors.
So the question we asked is, can we have an additional pair of AI eyes looking over and trying to do an additional check to make sure that the drugs are being given correctly?
Their research published in the NPJ Digital Medicine in October shows their AI achieved 98.8% specificity at detecting vial swap errors. They tested the AI algorithm while recording staged mismatches plus large amounts of data in the OR until eventually the program was trained to find discrepancies.
So it ultimately just uses all the visual cues of the vial or the syringe. So it looks at the color, the text, the orientation, the size.
Still, they had to find a way for the AI to recognize labels even when they're partially covered by, let's say, a hand, or if the lighting is dim. Through machine learning, their AI program was indeed able to find mistakes.
The way to think about it is, even, for example, you're buying a cereal, and even if half the words in the cereal are covered because of let's say you're buying Cheerios, and let's say CHE in the Cheerios are covered because someone has their hand on it, you can know the context of the colors around it. You know that the last few words are iOS, and you basically know that it's Cheerios, right?
The camera system has only been used for research and is not available in market. No details yet on how the errors would alert the provider, whether it's a beep or a visual cue through special glasses. The first step was to prove the AI can work.
Of course, having another person staying there rechecking is kind of a cumbersome solution. So using AI to do this automatically in the background, I think, is a really neat solution.
Meanwhile, researchers at Washington State are working on an AI program to detect diseases within minutes instead of using tests that take days to produce results. The technology focuses in on a cellular level, as Libby Dowsett explains.
Just imagine your doctor knowing within minutes whether your recent medical test shows cancer.
But we didn't really realize how fast it would be and the fact that it would be so much more accurate.
Washington State professor and biologist Michael Skinner said this deep learning AI model could revolutionize medicine.
It truly can be done in minutes to 10 minutes sort of period, rather than the day or two or week or two that you have to wait to get the image analysis on your MRI by your physician.
Researchers are using artificial intelligence to analyze high-resolution images with billions of pixels to show the kidneys, ovaries, testes, and prostates of rats and mice.
You can actually take that image, run it through this type of program, and it can tell you exactly where the abnormalities are. And it would still have to be trained each time.
The result, this AI model that not only identifies potential cancer or gene problems, but in some cases spots signs that trained human teams miss, almost down to a single cell.
You have potentially a tumor in the liver. and the tumor had 2 or 3 cells growing in the liver initially, that's it, you could actually see, because of the shape and the size of those cells, that those were actually tumor cells.
If the AI model fails, which is rare, scientists say just like the human mind, it learns from its mistakes. Libby Dowsett, KGW News.
Along with human testing, veterinarian researchers in Washington state are also using this model to analyze deer and elk tissue, and they plan to expand to other animals. If you want to read the full AI study, we have a link on our website, kgw.com. Still to come on the story, we're going to lighten things up a bit as Christmas is just over 20 days away. If your children wants to send a letter to Santa at the North Pole, do you need to put a real stamp on there? What the Postal Service has to say about it, and the confusion online when the story returns. And in the season, we have a live look from our pioneer Courthouse Square Skycam here with that beautiful tree now lit up after this weekend. With Thanksgiving behind us, Christmas is less than a month away, which means it's time to start writing those letters to Santa at the North Pole. But considering the mystical mailbox those letters are destined for, do they need stamps? Our Verify team looked into it and found that yes, letters to Santa do need postage, and the requirement has been in place for years. USPS has a specific program for those letters called Operation Santa. The program website spells out clear instructions. Address them to Santa at 123 Elf Road, North Pole, zip code 88888. The letters must have a complete return address, and they need to have a first-class stamp. The Operation Santa program dates back to 1912, when the Postmaster General authorized local post office branches to open the letters and then make sure children get replies. Several comments on Reddit show people thought they previously did not need to have postage on a letter to Santa, but USPS confirmed to us that it's always been required because all mail that enters the postal network must be paid for. There are a few possible reasons for the confusion. First, the Operation Santa website did not mention anything about postage prior to 2021. Second, it's common for local governments or agencies to set up their own letters to Santa programs, which could use drop boxes instead of the actual mail system, therefore no postage. And lastly, the stamp requirement varies by country. The US and UK both require stamps on letters to Santa, while mail services in Canada and New Zealand specifically say postage is not required to get those letters to the North Pole. In tonight's Digging for Old, we continue the Christmas theme with some sketches from a local artist who took a most creative approach to his family's Christmas cards year after year. Here's one of the earlier works in the Oregon Historical Society that the OHS has in its online collection. It was drawn by Paul Keller, a staff artist for the Oregon Journal. From 1926 to 1946, this is from 1932. Showing a box of Christmas greetings from Paul and his wife Frances, which landed with their friends Arthur and Mina Boone in California. Keller was widely known for his Oregon Vignettes, a series of 218 sketches that appeared as Sunday features in the journal. Here's another one from 1935 featuring Santa and little Fritz von Keller, the dog, making an appearance. The Oregon Historical Society has all kinds of these cards from the 1930s to the early 60s. But we will end on this one from 1950, which includes sketches of Frances and Paul on the left side and reads, "The Kellers may be cuckoos for not coming up with an original way of saying Merry Christmas, but we can't, so have a merry one." That is the end of our show tonight. Thank you very much for watching. For those of you watching live on TV, Straight Talk with Laura Porter is coming your way next. And if you're watching online, remember you can stream the story on your own schedule. Download the free KGW Plus app, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV, and catch us when it works for you. Have a great Monday night, and I'll see you back here tomorrow night at 6:30. Until then.